Hello, you are looking well today.
Thank you. Well, I'm really excited because we didn't lose power last night after the ice storm.
Hmm.
And for my amusement this morning, I was just watching people walk down the street ducking ice falling out of the trees. There's a lot of that going on.
Did a good job though. Hydro's
Excellent.
on the Piton, and yeah. So
Puis plus que
on.
ça, la ville de Montréal met beaucoup de gravelle sur les trottoirs
Oui,
pour la première fois que je me souviens.
oui. On était sur le Piton, pas mal. So
Exactement.
good. Okay, and those are bitching because it didn't turn out to be as bad as it was.
Shut the front door.
Please introduce our guest for this week.
Yes, well, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Rachel Goodman. I met her on LinkedIn, by the way. She spent the past 25 years at the crossroads of trauma, brain health, and lifelong mental wellness, and her path to this work is really compelling. She's the daughter of a child Holocaust survivor, and she grew up with an intimate understanding of intergenerational trauma and later witnessed how dementia and caregiving can really reshape the emotional lives of entire families. Just weeks into her role on the trauma team at Mount Sinai Hospital, she found herself responding in the aftermath of 9/11, which deepened her commitment to understanding how stress and trauma live in the brain over time. She's a clinical neuropsychologist, a community leader, mother of three. I always find that amazing. And she is dedicated to making mental health education accessible and rooted in science. So let us welcome, please, Dr. Rachel Goodman.
Well, I know what my first question is going to be, but let's bring her in here, Dr. Goodman, who's taking time out from her practice,
Busy schedule.
her services, to join us for a few minutes today.
Well, she's absolutely fascinating. We met on LinkedIn. We had a conversation. I read this really great article about resilience.
Hi,
There she is.
Good morning, Rachel.
Hello.
how are you?
Thank you for joining us today. Please continue, Era. LinkedIn is where you two connected, you were saying?
Yes, well, for me, LinkedIn is a great resource because I wanted to do some research because a lot of people know that I suffered a traumatic brain injury. And I was curious about trauma because you do get a little traumatized when you fall down and crack your head open. And I find that the word trauma can be somewhat overused these days, but it is not to be lessened. People who suffered the war in Rwanda, the people who suffered the Holocaust, my mother who lived through the war in Japan, and of course 9/11. So we had a great phone conversation. And here we are today. And I wanted her to come on because, first of all, one of the important things, as I find the words that mental health seem to be interchangeable with mental illness, and that's not the same thing at all.
Dr. Goodman.
Hi, Rachel.
Thank
Rachel.
you, Rachel. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly. Do
Yeah.
you
Well,
hear
I
me?
wanted to ask you. We had this discussion that people seem to use the words mental illness and mental health in the same sentence, but they're not the same thing, right?
They're definitely not. Mental health is the exact same thing as physical health. It's something that we all have, right? We talk about mental health as if it's something that people who are struggling mentally with their emotional health, with their mental health, with their, cognitive health it's as if that's people who have issues. But mental health is something that is comprised of your emotional health, your social health, your cognitive health. And it can be good sometimes, it can be less good sometimes. Obviously, it goes up and down. It's affected by different things. And we use it interchangeably. It's really a misnomer. Mental illness are the diseases that come related to our mental health.
Like dementia.
I mean, there,
Alzheimer's.
the ones that are kind of on the more serious end, if we talk about bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, personality disorders, major depression. But in addition, there are ones that kind of go along the spectrum. We all have some level of anxiety at times. We all have some level of sadness that can, be characterized as depression. We all have some level of personality features that may be problematic when interacting with other people. There are others, but it's really about how it affects your functioning. And as long as it's not affecting your functioning, then it's, determined whether it's something that needs to be addressed and is affecting you.
I was
I
reading
also-
the note. I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead, Yvan.
No, we were looking at your bio, Rachel, before you joined us, and it my goodness, it is wide and deep. First of all, what prompted you to get into this field in the first place?
So it's going to sound very cliche, but I was that person that people always came to talk to. I enjoyed listening to people, and being able to kind of tease out what was going on with people. I also have always been fascinated by the human brain from a neuroscience perspective. And I always thought I would go into psychiatry, to be honest. And then when I started researching psychiatry versus psychology, I realized this was more the field that I wanted to go with. And also in terms of my interest in working with older adults, geriatric population, which is a passion of mine, and prevention and wellness of aging and prevention of dementia. I was very close to my grandparents. So they were a very big presence in my life. And in addition, I watched two of them, my maternal grandmother and my paternal grandfather, both have dementia, and how that affected them and also their partners, the caregivers.
We should probably touch on quickly on the difference between psychology and
Sure.
psychiatry.
In order to be a psychiatrist, you go to medical school, and then you go and specialize like any other specialization, any residency in any different field. So psychiatry is one of them. And psychiatrists prescribe medication, psychologists do not. Myself, I completed a PhD in clinical psychology, which is a doctoral program, a large number of years, master's, and then PhD, where you learn about the different types of psychotherapy, different parts of the brain, how, abnormal psychology, developmental psychology, and depending on what you want to specialize as well, then people do different specializations afterwards.
Okay, and quickly, you have a practice, you see patients.
I do.
Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Era.
That's okay. I had read this wonderful article that Rachel had published in the Times of Israel. It's interesting. It's called, and I'm going to probably mispronounce this, but it's called Dor Lador. It's a Jewish intergenerational model of brain health, though, to be honest, this could be any culture. And I find this really interesting because when you think of trauma, you don't think about resilience. But with this particular model, this way of thinking, it's a lens that helps make sense of how resilience and identity are built and sustained over time after trauma. And I love that.
I would suggest even that we take a step back and that it's built before the trauma as well. Meaning everything that, everything that we are taught from our parents and from our grandparents and generations, and the culture and community around us and those values that are passed down is what leads us to, kind of be who we are. Obviously, each individually, we have our own characters, but if we're brought up in a culture and we follow that culture and that influence, it has an influence on us as well in terms of how resilient we are. That's my belief. I don't know that individually or statistically that's been shown. It has been shown to be protective, but of course there are people who follow certain cultures and are still, unfortunately, develop post-traumatic stress disorder or other things. There are very specific reasons why that happens in those cases. But generally, we know that community and certain values that are passed down in different cultures. Mine happens to be Jewish, but as you were saying, it's so many different cultures, and the notion of, the importance of community. And it's not just something that we say. We know that it's protective from a mental health perspective, from a physical health perspective. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago that the Surgeon General of the United States came out saying that loneliness is an epidemic.
Mm.
And we know that the effects of loneliness, and there are different understandings of loneliness. Somebody can live alone and not be lonely, right? Somebody can live with other people and still be lonely. It's about the person's experience, and also, of course, the actual experience of, do you have opportunities for social and cultural and community engagement? But I think that community itself is so wonderful on so many levels and so protective, from a mental health perspective and even from a cognitive perspective, because what's happening is you are having these opportunities to spend time with people, to have conversations, to be intellectually challenged, to be practicing certain practices or rituals that give you meaning and add meaning to your life. So that's where the idea came from.
It's about growth at the end of the day, right? I was reading
Absolutely.
about post-traumatic growth. Not, of course, it's not always spurred by trauma, but growth is the goal, is it not?
Yes, growth across the board is I think the goal for all of us as human beings, and the concept of post-traumatic growth is that when you come out of a trauma, and we talk about resilience, resilience in general is what we call bouncing back, meaning
Mm.
you go back to where you were before, which is obviously a wonderful thing to know that you're able to bounce back. But the idea of post traumatic growth means actually bouncing forward, that you've
Yes.
not only gone back to where you were before and you're in that same healthy state, but you've been changed by your experience, but in a positive way. This is not at all to suggest that, we're belittling the actual experience of the trauma or what that is for the individual and how horrible that is and how difficult it is to have to go through that. But it's also understanding that people do change for the good sometimes from a traumatic experience.
And the roots of course, you're talking about your family, the piece that I read too, the piece you wrote, and of course, the roots of the trauma that your family has dealt with. I mean, is life altering, life shattering. Those that you see who are suffering trauma that are not quite in the same vein, it's as much a negative effect on someone regardless of the order of the trauma, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that this is something that Eramelinda and I were talking about before, which is trauma is used kind of colloquially now, and it's not
Mm.
necessarily accurate. It's become a buzzword in social media. But the idea of having a traumatic event is an event where you watched somebody else's life being in danger. And that includes also physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, childhood trauma, as well as things like a plane crash, a natural disaster, a car crash, an assault, etc. But I think what you're asking is, if somebody has an individual trauma, meaning a one day something happens to them, is that equal to having a long term over many years? And the answer is yes, it could present differently. Obviously, there are different factors in having been in a traumatic experience for 4 years, being in a camp, whether that's a concentration camp in the Holocaust or whether it's a Japanese individual who was in a camp. I mean, these are obviously across the board in Rwanda. Unfortunately, we can be very bad people sometimes to other people, unfortunately. And at the same time, my personal experience, and my family was very blessed, is that we saw the goodness in people, and that a couple who could have been killed, honestly, for what they did, decided, a non-Jewish couple, to put themselves at risk at 60 plus years old and save my mother and hide her for 2 years. And that's the reason why we are here today. So there is evil in the world and there's goodness in the world, and we kind of live, I think, within all of that. In my opinion, trying to be the best version of ourselves that we can be.
It reminds me of a story quickly. I used to go to a gym in Montreal many years ago, and I used to see a gentleman there mid-morning. Mr. Gottlieb was his name. And one day I noticed that he had a tattoo. He had numbers tattooed on his arm. And he caught me sort of staring. And he just looked at me. I looked up, and all he said to me was, "People can be mean," and that was it. And that struck me like a ton of bricks. So, especially looking around us today, right now, with what's going on around the world too now. I don't mean to be indiscreet, but are you seeing echoes of that in the people you speak with? Yeah, you do. Yeah, okay.
I am. I see a variety of different individuals in my private practice who have different backgrounds, and who, have different connections to what's going on in the world, obviously. On a personal level, I have a daughter who is in Israel for the year, spending her gap year there. So I'm living that experience of having a child who is there during a war. And then obviously I know the other side. I've had patients who are from Iran and whose families are there, and what that's like for them, being bombed constantly. And I personally try not to get too much involved in politics. Obviously, when I'm in a professional setting, that's not appropriate. And my job is to connect to people on their level, and to help them with why they're there and what they're struggling with, and not be judgmental of people. That's obviously the job of a psychologist and a therapist, is to be non-judgmental, to be supportive. And as you pointed out before, in my opinion, the biggest goal of therapy is for personal growth.
And one final thing, which is what came to me at first when I was going through the bio notes: how do you not take this home every day?
So it's funny. I had a professor in graduate school who used to say, people ask me all the time, "Are you psychoanalyzing me?" Just people walking down the street or friends. We'd be at a dinner, and she'd say, "No, I get paid for that." So I don't do that when I'm with my family, with my friends. And when you're talking about not taking home the difficult cases that I may be working with, some of that comes with experience. I've been doing this for 25 years, and some cases do hit home harder. And you have to take care of yourself. That's one of the biggest lessons of being in this kind of profession, whether it's a psychologist or you yourselves interviewing people constantly. And, the job is for each of us to make sure that we're also taking care of ourselves, setting boundaries, doing things to make sure that we're setting time for ourselves, not just to exercise and eat healthy, but to be present in the present moment. And then when there's something that's difficult, it's whether I'm myself in therapy or talking to somebody else, obviously without giving names and being confidential and appropriate about it, but talking it out or writing it out, and making sure that you are giving yourself that space. And sometimes it's about being honest with the patient, not to say what you're saying is hard for me or it hurts me, but wow, this must be a lot for you. If I'm feeling this heaviness, this must be a lot for you.
I don't know. There's no crying quietly in the garage at night with a tub of ice cream? Okay.
There is. There's a lot of walking. There's a lot of walking. I love walking. So for me, that's a therapy, being outside and walking and listening to a podcast or walking with a friend and talking about other stuff. And the other thing for me is that I try to balance the kind of cases that I take if I have the luxury of doing that. So when you work with trauma, you're instructed not to fill your entire caseload with trauma cases. It is too much for one person. The same way that, a doctor or a nurse or somebody who works in palliative care, they have breaks. They only take certain number of cases, or they work on that and then they work on a different ward. So that's something we have to be careful of on our own. And that's in part why I have really been focusing on what we're talking about today in terms of prevention and wellness, that I find it gives me a purpose, and I hope pass on that purpose to other people, that there are things that we can do to help ourselves to feel better, and not just after the fact. I'm here as a psychologist, as a neuropsychologist, to do the intervention, to do the assessment after the fact when somebody comes to me in crisis mode. But I love working with people to say, okay, now you're in crisis mode, but let's think about when you're not in crisis mode. What are you going to implement into your daily life and into your routine that you're going to do from a prevention perspective so that you feel good? We brush our teeth, most of us, twice a day, every day. We don't usually wait to go to the dentist because we have a cavity. We brush our teeth regularly. We don't think about it. There are certain things with our physical health that we do from a prevention perspective all the time that they're just second nature. We're brought up as little kids doing these things. You put on a seatbelt, you hopefully wear a helmet when you ride a bike, all of these things. And with mental health and cognitive health, we're not so good with prevention. And that's one of the things that I've been working on is trying to share that message.
Well, when I
Okay.
was working with the Lazy Gingras Brain Trauma Center after I had my the hit and run accident, I became very interested in not only getting better because there was a lot of physical that came with it, but
Sure.
there was also a lot of mental that came with it too. I for about a month afterwards, I would almost wake up every day hearing the sound of my head hit the basement. I had that image in my head of going home and looking in the mirror, and I looked like Carrie from a horror movie. I was covered in blood.
Oh,
And it was my first time. This is an amazing center, but I worked with a neuropsychiatrist. And one of the things that she taught me is she said, it's important to recognize that these things happened, to recognize it, to validate it, and say, yes, but you can't keep going back there. You can't swim in it all the time. And also with human nature, we seem to remember the bad things more than the good things. And that's one of the things you were talking about in your article, when in a community, any community shares the good things. And I find we don't do that enough.
I agree.
Even with this ice storm, people were just, I won't use a derogative term, but this morning people, it was funny. It was like either there wasn't enough ice rain to justify all the warnings, and for some it was too many. And I was interested to find out that just weeks after joining the trauma team at Mount Sinai, you worked after 9/11. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say. That was a big event, just didn't affect the people there, but it affected the whole world.
Sure.
So we need to learn how to sort of move outside of that and look at the good things as opposed to the big bad stuff all the time. But it's not always easy.
No, I agree with you. When I was working on the 9/11 team at Mount Sinai, and I think I had told you this before the show, I had the great honor, and I don't have any other words to use other than that, to work with a large number of firefighters who had been in the building and cleaning up afterwards and doing a specialized therapy with them. And I mean, you don't face much worse than that.
Mhm.
And their resilience was truly extraordinary, and their motivation to get better. And also, exactly what you're saying, their capacity to see the goodness of the brotherhood of the firefighters and the human spirit that came out and the positive ways that New Yorkers were coming and thanking them. And they were just so appreciative. I also worked with a woman who, unfortunately, she's passed since then, but gave me permission to be able to speak about her. And she was known as the Dust Lady. The reason that they called her that was she was on the front page of the New York Times. And I don't know if you remember, but
Yes.
literally completely covered in dust. And she lived in one of those buildings downtown, which unfortunately, because of the toxicity of what had fallen from the towers, and she couldn't move. She didn't have the money to leave, and they weren't relocating people from their apartments. And she died from cancer from that toxicity. And it had been proven that these people had been infected, including firefighters and people living downtown. But her human spirit and the way that she looked at the world, despite what she had gone through, is exactly what you're referring to. And again, I hesitate to come across as saying we're supposed to be Pollyannas and have rose
Mm.
colored glasses and just look at the glass as if it's half full. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, my belief is that I always say to my clients, see the water in the glass. I'm not telling you just to see that the glass is half full instead of half empty. There's water there. It's more rational, it's more logical, it's more looking at both sides. you talked about the negativity bias that we have. That is a real thing. We all, as human beings, have what's called a negativity bias. It's actually negative specifically towards ourselves and our own experiences. And often we'll say something about ourselves or a situation that relates to us differently than we would if it was somebody else coming to us and telling us. And we try to get people to shift the way that they think and to look at things in a more rational, realistic way. There is a lot of difficulty in the world. There is a lot of, you talked before about people are mean, I think you said, Yvan. Some people are mean and some people are wonderful. And, we're always going to be faced by different people. I think we don't look as much at the people who are wonderful. We read the stories on social media about terrible things that are happening in the world and terrible politics, and all those things are real. They are in fact happening. And I'm not trying to create a movement of, oh, let's just, look at the good stuff, because that's not realistic. We are living in the mud. But in order to dig ourselves out sometimes, we kind of got to reach up a little bit and see.
Okay, well, let's look at some photos. Let's look at some love, some positive here. They're not necessarily in the proper order, perhaps, but please tell us what's going on here.
So I am all the way on the left in the burgundy sweater, and right next to me in the black is my mother. And the woman in between, in the middle, is the granddaughter of the woman who hid my mother. So my mother was hidden by a couple in Brussels, Belgium, for 2.5 years during the Holocaust, while her parents, my grandparents, were in a transit camp, a concentration camp. And their landlords, my grandparents' landlords, Alida and Charles Pontus, may their memory be blessed, saved her. And they treated her as if she was their granddaughter, and she lived like a Christian child for 2.5 years in their home as part of their family. And there's a museum which you may be familiar with in Jerusalem called Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Memorial Center in Israel. And one of the mandates of this museum is to recognize what are called righteous among the nations. So non-Jews who saved Jews during the Holocaust and recognize their generosity and their efforts and the risk that they took. And it's a very rigorous, actually, exercise in getting somebody into Yad Vashem. You have to be able to prove that these people actually saved the person. You have to prove that they did not take any money in order to do that. And once we did the whole application, we managed to get them approved to be considered righteous among the nations. And of course, this couple who were 60 years old at the time, which is now 80 years ago, were not alive. And so the granddaughter and the one who's next to her, the great-granddaughter, they accepted the award. And on the end is my sister. So we were very fortunate to travel with my mother to be there for this very special occasion.
Beautiful.
Okay. And
this is the couple, Alida and Charles Pontus, who saved my mother before the Holocaust.
And who do we have here?
This is Alida Pontus, who was with my mother, and this is a photo that was taken during the war.
Wow.
Yeah. This is my mission in life. I think everybody has a mission. I don't know if everybody figures it out, and I don't know, I'm sure I have other missions, but since I was a young child, this is my mission that I believe my mother was saved for a reason, and I was born for a reason, and it is to pay it forward. And so in whatever way that I do that, whether it's professionally or personally, every day I live my life with this concept and deep belief and understanding that I am here to make the world a better place in some small way. This photo, if you go back 1 second,
sorry.
Photo,
Yep.
That's okay. This is my grandfather, my mother's father, and my mother, who was very young. This was before the war. And before my grandparents were taken to the camp, and they had made this arrangement with the couple who were going to hide my mother, because she was the landlady, after they had been taken already to the camp, she went into their apartment, which had been ransacked by the Nazis, and she found this one photo. Unfortunately, she didn't find a photo that included my mother's mother, my grandmother, but this was the one photo that she found. Everything else had been torn and ruined. And she put this up on the wall immediately above my mother's bed. And every night, despite the fact that my mother was not supposed to talk about the fact that she was Jewish or that she was hidden, she said a little prayer every single night with my mother for her parents' safety.
Wow.
Is this your mom here?
This is my mother. So before my mother was hidden by this couple, and the way that actually it happened that they took her was that prior to that, there was a non-Jewish woman in the community in Brussels who I guess was well known to people. And she had gone to a number of Jewish families and said, look, it's getting bad here. If you'd like, give me your silver, your gold, your expensive goods, and I'll hide them in case you get taken, and then you'll come back and get it. And so a lot of people did that, including my grandparents. And then a couple of weeks later, things were getting even worse. And she came and said, look, give me your children, because if you get taken off the street and you're with your children, they're going to also go to a camp. So my grandparents, along with, I'm not sure if it was 10, 15, 20, we're not sure of the number right now, but a large number of families gave their children to this woman. And the woman called the SS, and she had them come in and give candies to each child. Obviously, the children didn't know what it was, and what little child doesn't take a candy. But my mother was very picky, and so she didn't eat anything green for some unknown reason. But she was taught as a European child to be extremely polite and to be quiet and just to say thank you. And she took it and she put it into the little petticoat of her skirt, and all the children died except for my mother because they were poisoned. And so that night when they came back to pick up my mother, my grandmother was crying at the kitchen table. And that's when the landlady came in to collect the rent. She saw that my grandmother was crying and asked her the story of what had happened and why she was crying. And that's when she offered to take my mother, and my mother lived with them for 2.5 years. This photo that you were seeing is from my nephew's bar mitzvah in Israel. I think it was about, 5-6 years ago. And or maybe a little longer. And my mother wasn't feeling well at the Wailing Wall, which is called the Kotel in Hebrew. And she sat down in a chair, and my sister-in-law's sister said, oh, I have a candy, maybe have a little bit of sugar to help you to feel better. And she took this green lollipop. And my mother had, I know it sounds silly, never eaten a green candy in her entire life until this day. And I popped a picture of her. It just felt very symbolic of her sort of, we're talking about resilience and door to door and post-traumatic growth and coming out of all of this and being at her grandson's bar mitzvah in Israel, 75 years later, and sitting there. And then I happened to post it on social media and it went viral, and thousands and thousands and thousands of people started commenting. So I guess people connected with it.
Wow. Who is this gentleman here?
This is my Uncle Stephen. The reason I included this photo is that he is a super ager. And I'm working, in talking about prevention of dementia and keeping yourself cognitively healthy. He's 90 years old. He has a cottage. He goes by himself. He drives to the cottage. He lives in Toronto. He drives to the cottage. He drives to Ottawa to visit his children. He came to visit me in Montreal, 5-hour drive. He drives the motorboat and the skidoo, and he canoes, and he's just truly an extraordinary, extraordinary guy. Not just lucky to have his cognitive faculties, but also he hiked for his whole life. He's physically active, and he's wonderful sense of humor, just a wonderful human being. And I think of him as my example of what is the way to live your life and be socially connected with people. And these are the things that keep you healthy cognitively. You have to be lucky. There's no question. And he'll say that. He says, I'm lucky. I didn't do anything special. But when I look at the things that he has done and how he's lived his life, being active, being involved in community, having so many friends, every night he has a drink, a shot of whiskey on FaceTime with a friend. And
Oh,
it used to be in person, and then it was COVID, and then it turned on to be on FaceTime, and then it went back, and then that friend passed away. Now he's doing it again on FaceTime with another friend who doesn't live near him and his brother-in-law. And it's just these kinds of behaviors, I believe, that keep us healthy and also just living life to your fullest.
that's
Okay.
beautiful.
Some media shots here. This is you and some colleagues at Global, I guess.
Well, that's Laura Casella, who is from Global Montreal, and the blonde woman is my colleague, Dr. Harriet Greenstone. And we ran an event called the 5 Bs: Better Brain, Body, and now I don't even remember what the last one is, but I think I sent it to you. But we
Bourbon.
Yes.
maybe,
Yeah.
maybe.
Okay. Hmm.
We had run this event trying to promote prevention of dementia and healthy living while we were the co-associate directors of the Alzheimer's Risk Assessment Clinic at the Jewish General Hospital. So that was a day when we went on Global to promote the event.
Okay.
This is a Holocaust survivor. His name is Andy Fuchs, and he volunteers for an organization that I'm very involved in called MATA. I think Eramelinda is
Yes.
familiar with it. So MATA is a soup kitchen and does so much more than that, a community agency. It happens to be a Jewish organization, but they feed Jewish and non-Jewish people alike. Not only do people come to get food or meals at MATA, but they also get deliveries once a week called Shabbat to Share, which is food that's delivered for people in order to be able to have meals for the Sabbath. For people who can't get out and go and collect it, they have a place where you can go once a month and get fresh vegetables and staples, etc. And Andy, who is, as you could see, an older gentleman who survived the Holocaust, his resilience is that he goes to MATA and helps to pack food and pack boxes and to deliver regularly. So volunteering, as we know, is an amazing, amazing thing, not just for others, but actually for ourselves.
Hmm.
This is just a sweet picture of myself and my mother. My mother, unfortunately, has Alzheimer's disease. It's progressed significantly. She was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment before the pandemic, and she went first, lived at home for a while, and then she needed help at home, and it got to be too much, and she moved into an assisted living facility. And here you're seeing her in a nursing home, and she's no longer like this, unfortunately, but she was still able to dance, and we were dancing to the music, and she just was enjoying herself, even though cognitively and physically she wasn't that wonderful at that time. Now, unfortunately, she's in a wheelchair and she's cognitively quite deteriorated. But the concept of dancing actually and music have both been shown to be so wonderful, as we all know, for the soul, for our physical health, but also for our cognitive health.
Michael J. Fox.
Yes. So my father had Parkinson's for 17 years, and I was so moved when Michael J. Fox first came out and announced that he had Parkinson's, and not just the bravery of doing that at such a young age when he was diagnosed. I think it was that he was in his mid 30s, but he announced it in his late 30s, which is really very, very early, obviously. And that he's been living with it for so long, but that he's written books about it. But I'm not sure if you're aware, but he started a foundation called the Michael J. Fox Foundation that has raised more money than
Yes.
any organization
Hmm.
for any disease whatsoever, billions
Hmm.
and billions of dollars. And I joined a research study through his foundation called the PPMI, and to follow people longitudinally to see what the risk factors are and what the genetics are of Parkinson's. My brother is in that study as well. He's actually been followed for many, many years. I just did it at the very beginning. And I had an extraordinary opportunity to meet Michael J. Fox at an event that my brother-in-law had done for an organization in Toronto called Ben Gurion University, Canada. And I actually told him that he is my hero, not just because of his TV and movies and how we all love him from that perspective, but what he's done for Parkinson's and for Parkinson's patients and Parkinson's families.
And this is you as the queen.
Yes.
Aw.
What's going on here?
This is Purim. A few years ago, Eramelinda had said to me, we were talking, and it was Purim, and the notion of getting dressed up and having fun and finding fun and meeting in, whether it's your faith, your community. And so my friends and I, despite the fact that we're in our 40s, 50s, 60s, we still get dressed up. I happen to love Queen Elizabeth. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was sent as a young child after her mother died to live with her family in England and lived there before she moved back to Belgium and got married. And you heard the story that happened to her there. But I've always loved the royal family, despite all of what we hear about them. Always thought that she was amazing. I loved watching the Crown and all the shows about it. So that was my ode to Queen Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm. Family shot here.
This is my family, and obviously Niagara Falls. I'm at a kind of interesting stage of life of being an empty nester. And this was in this past summer before my youngest went away for her gap year, and my other two live in New York. So we had an opportunity to be together. And these are my best friends from growing up. My mother is still friends with the friends that she made when she moved to Canada and was 13, 14 years old. And those are still her best friends. And these are my best friends from when I was young. And we continue whenever we can. We all live in different cities to get together. This was at the wedding of one of their children. And just the importance of being with one another and staying connected and celebrating. We talked about, positive. We also, unfortunately, have gone through many very difficult times, parents being sick, children being sick, parents passing away, etc. But we try to be there for each other and continue and stay connected.
That's worth a lot there.
This is needs a little bit of background. So if you're familiar with what happened on October 7th in Israel, the massacre that happened in Israel, there was a place called Kibbutz Be'eri, which was a kibbutz that was in southern Israel. And there was a woman who had written a book for children on the border of Israel and Gaza on the trauma of war, but from a children's perspective, a children's book. And her name was Lilach Kipnis. And an article came out at that time, at the very beginning, just after October 7th, where they didn't know where this woman was. And they thought that she had been one of the people who had been kidnapped and become a hostage. In fact, it turned out that she had been killed on that day and they hadn't yet found their remains. And I had read this article and read the book that was created for these children, which in English translates to Sounds That Startle. And I just fell in love with the book, and I felt that it had to be translated into English. And it took me several months, but I reached out to the family and I got them on board, and I got a few volunteer translators and children's book authors to help me. And we translated the book into English, and we had 1,000 copies printed to give away to children and high school students in schools across North America, both Jewish and non-Jewish environments, to learn what children who live with trauma experience and how we can help them and help them to understand the experience. So I went to Israel in February, and I actually met with the family. So the man that's there is the son of the woman who wrote this book. She and her husband and several other family members had also been killed on that day. This is her son, and this child is named in honor of his parents. His name is Oliver, and it's an acronym for his grandparents' names. And the woman there is the niece of the woman who wrote the book, and she helped me to translate the book. So it was very meaningful for me to be able to actually, after all this time writing back and forth by email and phone calls by WhatsApp, to actually be able to meet in person.
Okay, Rachel, you have not slept since 2013, I think, right? Am I right?
It's funny that that you say that because I actually have suffered terribly with insomnia, but recently it's gotten
God,
better. But yeah, I
honestly.
try. This is this is my mission. I I feel this is what gives meaning to my life.
It certainly moves you. Let's finish with a pastoral scene. And who is this?
That's my Uncle Stephen again with the canoe,
Okay.
just so you
Oh,
can
yeah.
see how incredible he is at 90
Hmm.
years old, pulling the canoe onto the dock.
Wow. Um, my goodness, there's so much there. Um, I'm not quite sure how we conclude this one, but I have to ask you for the 10-cent consult here with all that's going on in the world. What would you tell somebody on a street corner who says, "What am I going to do? What do I do?" Is it turn off the TV? Is it what is it? What is it we do?
I think that's part of it. I think that, I hate to say this while we're recording a podcast, but I think people are exposed to way too much information and too much
Mm.
social media, too much news, as you're suggesting. But again, I don't like to put my head in the sand. I really don't like to tell people to do that. I think that it's about living with intentionality. That's really important. And also kind of a balance. And I know it sounds very simple, but it's about waking up in the morning and making a decision. So I do want to be informed. I'm not going to close my eyes. I'm not going to put my head in the sand, but I need to check in with myself. How am I feeling? Is it too much? Am I not sleeping? Am I feeling anxiety? Maybe I need to shut it down a little bit. Maybe I need to, go be a little bit more with nature. Today is not a great day to be with nature, although it's fascinating to look outside and see the ice as long as you're inside your house. Not a
Yeah.
great day to be walking outside, but the idea of, I think, making sure that you are trying to find balance and making sure that you are including connection. I'm a connector. For me, that's one of the most important things, is making sure that you're spending time with people that you love, making sure that you are being stimulated, not overstimulated by news and by,
Yeah.
those kinds of things, but stimulated in a healthy and nourishing way. And then knowing when you need to kind of slow down the stimulation and just be by yourself and turn things down a little bit.
And if I may, it's interesting what you said. There were several things that you said, about for you having purpose and a mission and making things better. I sort of moved this over to the side now. I have quite a few social media accounts, and I try not to let it bother me, but sometimes I can't help myself. I get into a conversation where, there are differences. That's fine, but you don't need to let it degenerate into an insult. And there was this one guy that I no longer follow, but I just found that every time anybody said something, he always had something really mean to say. And I rarely respond to these things. So I sort of tipped in and said very politely, it seems that you seem really upset all the time. But I find instead of feeding that angst and that anger and insulting people, maybe if there are things that are bothering you, maybe you should find a mission, volunteer. If you don't, if there's lots of charities, help the homeless, help, children victims of domestic violence, work at a food bank. Because as you said, these are things. And it was interesting because I tried 3 times because he would come back and say, I don't have time for that. And I would say very politely, yes, but you have time,
Exactly.
to talk Saurus, but it was almost impossible because I just felt he was really leaning into it because some people feed on angst,
You're right.
right? The old First Nations, which wolf do you feed? Do you feed the angry one or do you feed the happy one? Well, if I may ask you to close this, how can we best feed the happy ones?
I don't believe in only talking to people that we agree with.
Right.
I think that positive conversations come from people who have different opinions. So I'm not afraid to have a conversation with someone who has a different opinion. And I enjoy that. And it's stimulating, right? And I want to learn from other people who know other things than I do. I don't only want to talk to people who who know the same things that I do or think the exact same way. I don't think that's healthy. That being said, like you're saying, being exposed to people who are angry, and we're not going to go into a whole narcissistic conversation now, but that's another buzzword, narcissism and, gaslighting and all of that. It really can take you down. And I think that part of it is when you're talking to somebody and you're asking about feeding the happy ones, check in with yourself and see how you feel in your body when you're talking to somebody, when you're on a social media account. Does this make me feel sick? Do I feel like in the pit of my stomach? And again, I don't mean to be running away from scary or upsetting information. It's not that. Is this affecting me negatively? And when I spend time with this person, or I watch this funny show, or I listen to this podcast, how does that make me feel? When I volunteer, when I try something new, it's scary, but how do I feel when I'm doing it, right? Our bodies talk to us. And for me, I think that you made an amazing point. I think doing things for others and finding meaning is really what can lead us to be leaning against that happiness wall. It's not about just wearing rose-colored glasses.
Exactly.
Leaning against the happiness wall. Perfect. Rachel, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thank you for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
And Mazel Tov. And what can I say? I wish you all the energy in the world.
Thank you.
And I'm thrilled to bits to have met you on LinkedIn. And as we said, we've never actually met in person, Yvan, but we're going to go for a coffee. Really
Yes,
soon.
we are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both.